The Mariana Trench, located in the western Pacific Ocean, is the deepest known part of the Earth's oceans and has long been a subject of fascination and scientific inquiry due to its extreme depth and unique ecosystem. Among the many mysteries associated with this underwater chasm, one particularly intriguing claim has emerged: the alleged discovery of a massive bone pit at its deepest point, the Challenger Deep. The story of the bone pit appears to have originated from or gained popularity through conspiracy theory forums and iceberg charts that list various mysteries and conspiracies. According to this claim, a gigantic pile of bones was supposedly discovered at the bottom of the Challenger Deep during a bathyscaphe expedition in 1960. It's important to note that this claim is extremely sparse in details. There is no information about the type, size, or origin of these alleged bones. The story provides no context about who made this discovery or any follow-up investigations. This lack of specific details leads many to believe that this is more fiction than fact. Nevertheless, it's an entertaining topic. Some speculate that it could be the remains of an underwater civilization akin to the myth of Atlantis. Others suggest it might be a burial site for an unknown underwater civilization. Given the prevalence of UFO sightings near oceans, some theorize that aliens might be using the trench to dispose of remains. However, the most likely explanation is that the story is entirely fictional, created for entertainment or as part of conspiracy theory lore. While the bone pit story remains unsubstantiated, legitimate scientific research in the Mariana Trench has yielded fascinating discoveries. The trench hosts bizarre and unique lifeforms adapted to extreme pressure and darkness. These include translucent and bioluminescent creatures, as well as species like the Mariana snailfish, which can survive at depths of 26,200 feet. James Cameron's 2012 expedition revealed thick layers of bacteria on the trench floor, subsisting solely on chemical reactions between water and rock. Researchers estimate that the trench bottom might house 50 to 100 species of giant amoeba-like organisms called xenophyophories. The trench is home to unusual underwater volcanoes, including some that spew molten sulfur and liquid carbon dioxide. In 2014, scientists recorded a strange biometallic sound near the trench dubbed the Western Pacific Biotwang. While likely produced by minke whales, its exact purpose remains unknown. Despite its remote location, the Mariana Trench is not immune to human impact. In 2019, a diver discovered candy wrappers and a plastic bag at a depth of 35,849 feet, indicating significant contamination. Some areas of the Mariana Trench are reportedly more polluted than some of China's most contaminated rivers. Deep-sea amphipods in the trench have been found consuming plastics and microfibers, raising concerns about long-term ecological impacts. For over 2 decades, a series of unsolved murders has haunted Chicago's south and west sides, leading some to believe that a serial killer dubbed the Chicago Strangler may be responsible. Between 1999 and 2018, at least 51 women fell victim to seemingly similar modus operandi. The vast majority of the women were African American, ranging in age from their late teens to late 50s. Many of them had histories of involvement in sex work or struggled with substance abuse issues. These factors likely contributed to their vulnerability, making them easier targets for the perpetrator or perpetrators. The geographical distribution of the murders is of particular interest. The killings were primarily concentrated in 3 main areas of Chicago: the South Side, Far South Side, and West Side. Specific neighborhoods such as Washington Park and Garfield Park, known for their histories of violent crime and drug use, have been common locations for these murders. This clustering suggests that the killer or killers may have a particular familiarity with these areas, potentially living or working nearby. The method of killing and disposal of the bodies follows a consistent pattern. Nearly all of the victims were found strangled or asphyxiated. In many cases, the women were discovered with plastic bags over their heads. The bodies were often dumped in isolated or abandoned locations, including vacant lots, alleyways, and empty buildings. This choice of disposal sites not only made it more difficult to discover the bodies quickly, but also complicated the collection of forensic evidence. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of these murders is the treatment of the victims' bodies. In almost all cases, the women were found partially or fully stripped of clothing. Many showed signs of assault, suggesting a possible motive behind the killings. Some bodies were even set on fire, potentially in an attempt to destroy evidence. The timeline of these murders reveals interesting patterns that have fueled speculation about the nature of the culprit. There was a notable pause in killings from 2014 to 2017. This gap has led some investigators to speculate that the perpetrator may have been incarcerated during this period. Amongst all of the cases tied to this mystery, several stand out due to particularly gruesome details. Angela Ford's case is considered one of the earliest in the series. In 1999, Ford disappeared after leaving her home to pick up her children's report cards. Days after her disappearance, she was found strangled and unconscious. Unlike many of the other victims who were killed immediately, Ford survived the initial attack but remained in a coma for 18 months before succumbing to her injuries in 2001. This prolonged period between the attack and her death added an extra layer of anguish for her family, who had to watch her struggle for life for over a year. Ford's case is significant not only for its early occurrence in the murders, but also for the manner in which it differs from later cases. The fact that she was left alive, albeit unconscious, suggests that the killer's methods may have evolved over time, becoming more lethal and efficient in subsequent attacks. Another case involves a woman named Gwendolyn Williams. This case occurred in 2002 and stands out for the physical evidence left behind and the insight it provides into the victim's struggle against her attacker. Williams was the oldest of 6 siblings and was described as a protective figure. She was found murdered, half-dressed, and covered in blood. Underneath Williams' fingernails, investigators obtained DNA evidence. This evidence indicated that she had fought fiercely against her attacker, potentially providing investigators with valuable genetic material that could lead to the killer's identification. Her sister, Sharon Pritchett, noted, "She fought him, she scratched him up. Gwen was protective, she was a fighter, and she wasn't afraid of anyone." Interestingly, 16 years after Williams' murder, cold case detectives revisiting her file re-entered the unidentified DNA evidence into an FBI database. This led to a potential match with a 56-year-old homeless man living in Tampa, Florida. However, despite initial hope, the man was released after questioning, and prosecutors deemed the DNA evidence insufficient to press charges. This development underscores the challenges faced by investigators in solving these cold cases, even with advances in DNA technology. Then in 2007, there were the murders of Teresa Bunn and Hazel Lewis. Teresa, a 21-year-old woman who was 8 months pregnant at the time, went missing on a Monday in November. Her body was discovered that same night, but it wasn't until Thursday that she could be positively identified. She had been strangled, stripped naked, and stuffed into a dumpster. Her body was then covered with a flammable accelerant and set on fire. The severity of the burns forced investigators to use dental records for identification. Before Teresa could even be identified, the body of 52-year-old Hazel Lewis was discovered under eerily similar circumstances. Firefighters found Hazel's body while extinguishing flames from a garbage can where she had been discarded. Like Teresa, Hazel had been strangled before her body was burned. In total, there were 4 similarities shared between these 2 murders. The short time frame between these murders and their nearly identical approach led investigators to initially acknowledge the possibility of a serial killer. These are just a few of the many murders tied to the so-called Chicago Strangler. However, despite some being adamant that a serial killer was involved, the Chicago Police Department consistently denied this theory. They argue that there is no concrete evidence linking the cases and that DNA samples from crime scenes do not match. A CPD spokesperson stated, "There is absolutely no information to suggest this is the work of an active serial killer." However, the police response has been criticized on several fronts, including slow initial response to reports of missing women, lack of media attention and public awareness, perceived indifference due to the victims' backgrounds and race, and low clearance rate for homicides in Chicago overall. Some family members of victims have expressed frustration with the police investigation. Riley Ford, Angela Ford's father, said, "Every time we talk to a detective, they know less about the case, or cared less about the case, I don't know." While the serial killer theory has gained traction, other possibilities have been proposed. Some experts suggest that 2 or 3 serial killers might be operating in the area. It was once suggested that Darren Dion Van, a convicted serial killer from nearby Gary, Indiana, was a potential suspect. Van told police he had killed people in Illinois, but no direct connection has been established. Others argue that rather than a serial killer, the real issue is systemic neglect of crimes against marginalized women in Chicago. The disappearance and death of Corrie Ottenbreit is a tragic case that has raised suspicions of a possible serial killer operating in the Edmonton area of Alberta, Canada. Her story is intertwined with those of several other women whose remains were found in close proximity, leading investigators to consider the possibility of a serial predator targeting vulnerable individuals. Corrie was a 27-year-old woman living in Edmonton, Alberta. She was last seen by a family member on May 9, 2004 at approximately 10 p.m. when she left her home to go to work. She was known to be a worker along 118 Avenue in northeast Edmonton, an area that has been associated with several other missing and murdered women. At the time of her disappearance, Corrie was described as 5 foot 5 inches tall, weighing 120 pounds. Her naturally red hair had been dyed blonde. She was believed to be wearing a black leather jacket, black or blue jeans, and black Fila running shoes when she was last seen. On April 19, 2015, nearly 11 years after Corrie's disappearance, human remains were discovered on a rural property near Leduc, Alberta, south of Edmonton. Initially, the remains were identified as belonging to Dolores Brower, another missing woman. However, further investigation revealed that some of the remains also belonged to Corrie. The identification of her remains was made possible through DNA analysis of a hair sample she had voluntarily provided to Project CARE's Proactive Street Team in December 2003. This was a significant development as it marked the first time that such a collection from the CARE Proactive Street Team led to a positive identification. This team is a special unit of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police formed in 2003 in response to the growing number of cases involving missing women and the discovery of human remains on the outskirts of Edmonton. The project was established to investigate murdered and missing women from the Edmonton area. The discovery of the remains has led investigators to suspect the involvement of a serial predator. Her remains were found within an 8-kilometer radius of 4 other women's remains. Edna Bernard, last seen September 22, 2002, with remains found the next day. Katie Sylvia Ballantyne, last seen April 28, 2003, with remains found July 7, 2003. Dolores Brower, last seen May 15, 2004, with remains found April 19, 2015. And Amber Tuccaro, last seen August 18, 2010, with remains found September 1, 2012. All of these women, except for Amber, were known to have been workers in Edmonton. The proximity of these discoveries has raised serious concerns among investigators and the public. RCMP Inspector Stacey Talbot stated, "One of the investigative theories in relation to these deaths is we may be dealing with a serial predator. This theory is supported by the analysis of cases around Edmonton in the 1990s and early 2000s, which led RCMP to believe there was a serial killer, or possibly multiple serial killers who were preying on women in the area." The investigation into Corrie's case, as well as the other related cases, has faced several challenges. The significant time gap between Ottenbreit's disappearance and the discovery of her remains has made the investigation more difficult. Potential evidence may have been lost or degraded over time. Many of the victims, including Corrie, were involved in the trade, which can make investigations more challenging due to the transient nature of their work and potential reluctance of witnesses to come forward. The remains were found in rural areas, which can make it harder to find witnesses or physical evidence. Additionally, the cases span different time periods and potentially different jurisdictions, which can complicate coordinated investigative efforts. Morgellons disease is a controversial and poorly understood condition that has sparked significant debate within the medical community. It is primarily characterized by the presence of unusual fibers or filaments that appear to emerge from the skin, accompanied by a range of other symptoms. Patients often report sensations of crawling, biting, or stinging on or under their skin, which can lead to considerable distress. In addition to these hallmark symptoms, individuals with Morgellons may experience skin lesions that are slow to heal feel, intense itching, fatigue, joint and muscle pain, cognitive difficulties often described as brain fog, sleep problems, and various neurological symptoms. There are two dominant perspectives regarding its cause. The first perspective views it as a form of delusional parasitosis or delusional infestation, suggesting that patients have a false belief that they are infested with parasites or foreign materials, despite a lack of medical evidence supporting such claims. Conversely, some researchers and patients argue that morgellons is a genuine physical condition that may be linked to infectious agents, such as Borrelia burgdorferi, the bacterium responsible for Lyme disease. One of the most comprehensive studies on morgellons was conducted by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in 2012. This study examined 115 patients who self-reported symptoms consistent with morgellons. Key findings indicated that no common underlying medical condition or infectious agent was identified among the participants. Additionally, the fibers found on patients were mostly consistent with cotton and other environmental sources. Many participants were also found to have one or more coexisting psychiatric conditions. However, this study has faced criticism regarding its methodology and conclusions from some researchers and patient advocacy groups who believe it did not adequately address the complexity of the condition. The tale of Oliver Lerch's mysterious disappearance is an urban legend that has evolved over the decades, and some people even perceive it as a true mystery nowadays. The story's roots can be traced back to a piece of fiction written by American author Ambrose Bierce, first published in the San Francisco Examiner on October 14, 1888. Bierce's article titled "Whither" contained 3 stories of mysterious disappearances, including one about a farmer named Williamson vanishing while crossing a field in 1854, James Byrne Worson disappearing during a foot race, and Charles Ashmore vanishing while fetching water from a well in 1878. These stories were presented in a journalistic style with specific details like dates, locations, and supposed witness accounts, giving them a veneer of credibility. However, they were entirely fictional creations by Bierce. Over time, elements of these stories, particularly the Charles Ashmore tale, began to take on lives of their own as urban legends. The core elements remained largely the same, but names, dates, and locations changed. The Oliver Lerch version first appeared in print in the Scrapbook in November 1906. This iteration was set in South Bend, Indiana on Christmas Eve 1889 and added the detail of Oliver's voice being heard from the sky. It became a popular ghost story which spread by word of mouth. Another variant, known as the David Lang version, appeared in Fate magazine in July 1953, written by Stuart Palmer. This version was set in Gallatin, Tennessee in 1880 and added elements like a circle of dead grass appearing where Lang vanished. Palmer claimed it to be a true story told by Lang's daughter. Yet another iteration, the Orion Williamson version, appeared in J. Robert Nash's 1978 book Among the Missing. This version was presented as the quote-unquote true story that inspired Bierce's fiction and was set in Selma, Alabama in 1854. The various versions of the story have been preserved through paranormal and mystery anthologies, especially those aimed at children and young adults. Radio shows and magazines focused on strange phenomena. However, efforts to verify the stories have consistently failed. No contemporary newspaper accounts or official records of the supposed incidents have been found, and searches for individuals named in the stories have turned up no evidence of their existence. In some cases, weather records contradict details in the stories, such as the absence of snow in South Bend in December 1889. Notable debunking efforts include a 1932 denial by the South Bend Tribune that the Oliver Lerch incident occurred there, an investigation by Bob Rickard and Robert Forrest in 1976, published in the Fortean Times, Fate magazine's 1977 retraction of the David Lang story, and Joe Nichols' research published in Secrets of the Supernatural in 1988. Dhaka muslin was an extraordinary cotton fabric produced in Bengal, modern-day Bangladesh, that gained worldwide fame and admiration in the 17th and 18th centuries. This fabric was known for its unparalleled fineness, transparency, and delicate beauty, earning it names like woven air and evening dew. The origins of muslin production in the Indian subcontinent date back to ancient times. Cotton was first used in the Indus Valley civilization, with the art of weaving predating even that. Ancient India, particularly Bengal, had a head start in producing fine cotton textiles. Historical records mention muslin-like fabrics as early as the 10th century BCE, with Greek ambassador Megasthenes noting Indians wearing flowered garments made of the finest muslin around 300 BCE. Bengal, especially the Ganges Valley region, was renowned for producing the finest qualities of cotton cloth. The Dhaka region in particular became the epicenter of muslin production, with its fabric considered the jewel in cotton's crown. What set Dhaka muslin apart was its extraordinary fineness and transparency. The finest muslins had thread counts of 800 to 1,200, far surpassing modern fabrics. Legends claim that a 60-foot length could pass through a ring or fit into a matchbox. The secret to its unique qualities lay in a special variety of cotton called Futicarpus, which grew only along the banks of the Meghna River near Dhaka. This plant produced extremely fine, short-stapled, silky, and strong fibers that became even stronger when soaked in the local waters. The production of Dhaka muslin involved an intricate 16-step process. It began with carefully harvesting the Futicarpus, followed by cleaning using the jawbone of a local catfish. The fibers were then carded to separate and align them. The spinning process was particularly crucial, performed by young women with nimble fingers in highly humid conditions, often on boats in the early morning. Finally, master weavers spent months creating a single piece on specialized looms. The spinning and weaving processes required extreme skill and specific environmental conditions, with humidity being crucial for maintaining the delicate fiber's integrity. The Mughal emperors, particularly Akbar, elevated muslin to royal status. They ordered the production of, quote, special muslin, exclusively for the imperial household. They also assigned special names to the different varieties of muslin. In Europe, Dhaka muslin revolutionized fashion. It replaced rigid Georgian dresses with sheer chemise gowns, causing a sensation in aristocratic circles. The fabric's near-naked appearance led to accusations of indecency, with some claiming that an entire social class appeared in public naked. Dhaka muslin's influence extended far beyond South Asia and Europe. It was traded to the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and China. The fabric's reputation for quality and luxury made it a symbol of status and refinement across cultures. The decline of the fabric began with the British colonization of India in the late 18th century. Several factors contributed to its disappearance. The British East India Company disrupted production through trade monopolies and high taxes, aiming to protect their domestic textile industry. The Industrial Revolution and the invention of power looms in England led to mass-produced, cheaper imitations of muslin. The decline of Mughal power meant the loss of royal patronage for high-quality muslin. Environmental factors such as changes in climate and agricultural practices may have affected the growth of Futicarpus. Economic pressures forced many weavers to abandon their craft or switch to producing coarser fabrics. By the early 20th century, the techniques for making true Dhaka muslin were lost, and the Futicarpus cotton plant became extinct in its original form. While the finest Dhaka muslin disappeared, a related fabric called jamdani survived. Jamdani is a figured muslin with geometric or floral patterns woven into the fabric. It is considered the sole survivor of muslin's lineage, though preserved in a coarser variety with lower yarn counts generally below 100. Jamdani weaving continues in Bangladesh today, using techniques similar to those used for centuries. The process involves two weavers working on a pit loom, incorporating intricate patterns using supplementary weft threads. In 2013, UNESCO inscribed the traditional art of Jamdani weaving on the representative list of intangible cultural heritage of humanity, recognizing its cultural significance. In recent years, there have been concerted efforts to revive Dhaka muslin. Projects like Bengal muslin, launched in 2014, aim to research the history of muslin and attempt to recreate the fabric. Scientists are working to identify and cultivate cotton plants closely related to the extinct Futicarpus. DNA analysis of preserved cotton samples has led to the discovery of a shrub in Bangladesh that closely matches the original plant. Artisans are attempting to recreate muslin using traditional techniques and finer cotton yarns. Some have managed to produce fabric with a count of 300, though this is still far from the historical 800 plus count. The Bangladesh government has initiated projects to support muslin revival, including efforts to obtain geographical indication certification for the fabric. Museums and cultural institutions are working to preserve existing muslin samples and educate the public about its historical significance. These revival efforts face significant challenges. The exact techniques used to produce the finest muslin have been lost, and recreating the environmental and botanical conditions necessary for its production is complex. Additionally, the market for such a labor-intensive, high-value fabric in the modern world is uncertain. The history of crop circles can be traced back to earlier centuries, though the modern phenomenon gained significant attention in the late 1970s and 1980s. One of the earliest recorded instances resembling a crop circle dates back to 1678. A news pamphlet titled "The Mowing Devil" or "Strange News Out of Hertfordshire" described a field of oats with stalks cut in a circular pattern. However, this account differs from modern crop circles as the stalks were cut rather than bent. In 1880, amateur scientist John Rand Capron reported circular spots in a field near Guildford, England. He attributed these to cyclonic wind action, noting prostrate stalks arranged in a circular pattern around a center. The modern crop circle phenomenon truly began to take shape in the latter half of the 20th century. In the 1960s, reports of circular formations in reeds and sugarcane fields emerged from Tully, Queensland, Australia, and parts of Canada. The famous Tully saucer nest case occurred in 1966, where a farmer claimed to have witnessed a saucer-shaped craft rise from a swamp, leaving behind a circular area of flattened reeds. In the 1970s, UFO enthusiasts in Wiltshire, England began reporting saucer nests, though these were never photographed. In 1978, Doug Bauer and Dave Chorley, two British pranksters, claimed to have started creating crop circles in cornfields, inspired by the Tully case. Throughout the late 1970s and 1980s, crop circles began appearing more frequently in the English countryside, particularly in Hampshire and Wiltshire. In 1991, Doug Bauer and Dave Chorley made headlines by claiming responsibility for initiating the crop circle phenomenon. They stated that they had created over 200 crop circles between 1978 and 1991, using simple tools such as a plank of wood, rope, and a cap fitted with a wire loop to maintain straight lines. To prove their claim, Bauer and Chorley created a circle in front of journalists. Pat Delgado, a proponent of paranormal explanations for crop circles, examined this circle and declared it authentic before learning it was a hoax. This revelation had a significant impact on the crop circle community. However, rather than ending the phenomenon, it inspired a new wave of crop circle artists, leading to an increase in the number and complexity of formations worldwide. Crop circles have evolved from simple circular patterns to intricate geometric designs. They range in size from 30 meters to over 2 kilometers in diameter, with modern formations featuring up to 2,000 different shapes and incorporating complex mathematical and scientific elements. In the UK, crop circles tend to appear near roads, areas of medium to dense population, and cultural heritage sites like Stonehenge or Avebury. They usually appear overnight, and nearly half of all crop circles found in the UK in 2003 were located within a 15-kilometer radius of the Avebury stone circles. While various theories exist about the creation of crop circles, human involvement is the most widely accepted explanation. The basic technique involves the wood and wire loop, as we have just mentioned. More complex formations might involve GPS and lasers. Wet weather conditions can allow grass to be bent without breaking it, facilitating the creation process. Some have suggested natural causes for crop circles, including freak weather events like tornadoes or ball lightning, whirlwinds affected by local topography, and even animal activity. In Tasmania, wallabies under the influence of opium poppies were found creating simple circles in poppy fields. However, there is no scientific evidence supporting these natural explanations for complex crop formations. If you have been following the series for a while now, you'd know that the iceberg itself is quite old, and since its inception, some mysteries have been solved. This next entry is one such case. The Pendleton quadruple homicide case, often referred to as the Anderson County Massacre, shocked the small community of Pendleton, South Carolina in 2015. On November 2nd, 2015, 4 family members were found brutally murdered in their home on Refuge Road. The victims were Terry Michael Scott, 58, his wife Kathy Scott, 60, and their mothers Violet Taylor, 85, and Barbara Scott, 80. Kathy Scott's daughter called police to report finding the bodies of her family members in their double-wide mobile home off Refuge Road. The crime scene was described as one of the bloodiest and most brutal that investigators had ever encountered. All 4 victims had been stabbed to death with their throats slashed. Additionally, each victim was shot in the head post-mortem except for Kathy Scott, who was shot while still alive but ultimately died from a knife wound to the chest. From the start, the case presented several puzzling aspects. The combination of stabbing and shooting suggested either multiple killers or a single perpetrator with a complex motive. The presence of children's toys on the living room coffee table indicated the Scotts were expecting a visit from their grandchildren. An empty holster under the bed suggested Kathy may have tried to access a weapon but was overpowered. The brutality of the crime scene, described as gruesome and gory, hinted at a deeply personal motive. Early in the investigation, Amy Velarde and her husband Ross emerged as persons of interest. The couple lived in a separate single-wide residence on the same Refuge Road property, less than 50 yards from the crime scene. Several factors drew investigators' attention to the Velardes. Amy had a history of conflicts with her mother and stepfather, particularly over the raising of Amy's children. Investigators found approximately $67,000 in cash in the Velardes' home after the murders, suggesting a potential financial motive. The day after the funeral, Ross allegedly removed furniture and carpets from the murder house, disposing of them in the yard, which raised suspicions. Amy reportedly wore a red dress with a Kentucky Derby-style hat to the funeral, which some family members found inappropriate. As the case progressed, several key pieces of evidence and information came to light. The nature of the knife wounds led investigators to suspect someone with military training might be involved. Ross was a decorated U.S. Marine with specialized training. Despite claiming the $67,000 found in their home was from their pet grooming business, the Velardes had a history of financial difficulties. Former employees reported issues with unpaid wages and bill collectors constantly calling the business. Text messages between Amy and Ross revealed discussions about money problems in the weeks leading up to the murders. On October 22, 2015, just 9 days before the killings, they discussed needing to come up with $7,000 by November 1st. Video from a convenience store on the night of the murders showed Ross wearing red sneakers, matching bloody shoe prints found at the crime scene. When interviewed by investigators years later, Ross provided an account that contradicted earlier statements and cell phone location data about the couple's whereabouts on the night of the murders. Serial numbers on cash found in the Velardes' possession after the murders matched bills that Mike Scott had in his home before he was killed. Over the years, the case saw several legal twists. After the murders, the Velardes remodeled the Scotts double-wide and lived there until 2017. They then entered into a real estate contract to purchase the property, which resulted in a breach of contract lawsuit. The Velardes filed lawsuits against the sheriff's office seeking the return of items seized during the investigation, including vehicles, electronic devices, firearms, and $60,000 in cash. They also sued Amy's aunt, Pam Isbell, over vehicle ownership. In December 2021, a global settlement was reached, resulting in the distribution of about $65,000 to family members, with about $35,000 going to the Velardes. The case gained renewed attention in spring 2023. Anderson County Sheriff Chad McBride publicly named Amy and Ross Velarde as persons of interest in the case. On December 15, 2023, more than 8 years after the murders, the Anderson County Sheriff's Office announced the arrests of Amy and Ross. Both were charged with 4 counts of murder in connection with the 2015 killings. The arrest came after extensive investigation, including the involvement of the television show Cold Justice. The show's team, led by Kelly Siegler, worked with the local law enforcement to review evidence and conduct new interviews, which contributed to building a stronger case against the Velardes. Key factors leading to the arrests included a detailed examination of their finances, which revealed inconsistencies in their claims about the source of the cash found in their home. The matching of Ross's shoes to bloody prints at the crime scene provided a crucial link. Text messages and cell phone data contradicted the couple's alibi and revealed financial pressures leading up to the murders. New interviews with family members and former employees provided additional context about the strained relationships and financial troubles. As of February 2024, both Amy and Ross Velarde remain in custody at the Anderson County Detention Center after being denied bond. The case is being prosecuted by the Office of South Carolina Attorney General Alan Wilson, with Senior Deputy Attorney General Heather Weiss and Assistant Attorney General Kinley Abbey leading the efforts. The arrests have brought a measure of relief to the victims' families, who have waited 8 years for progress in the case. However, as with all criminal cases, the Velardes are considered innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. The Bennington Triangle is a term coined by author Joseph A. Citro in 1992 to describe an area in southwestern Vermont known for a series of mysterious disappearances and strange occurrences. This region, centered around Glastonbury Mountain, encompasses the towns of Bennington, Woodford, Shaftesbury, and the former logging towns of Glastonbury and Somerset. The area has a long history of unusual events and folklore. Native American tribes, particularly the Abenaki, avoided the region due to their belief that it was cursed. They had legends of a man-eating stone on Glastonbury Mountain and believed their god dwelled at its summit. Glastonbury and Somerset, once thriving logging and industrial towns, fell into decline in the late 19th century. They were officially unincorporated by the Vermont State Legislature in 1937, becoming ghost towns. The triangle gained notoriety primarily due to a series of unexplained disappearances that occurred between 1945 and 1950. These cases remain unsolved and have contributed to the area's mysterious reputation. On November 12, 1945, 74-year-old Mitty Rivers, an experienced hunting guide, disappeared while leading a group of hunters near Long Trail Road and Vermont Route 9. Rivers separated from his son-in-law Joe Lozon at a fork, saying he would only be going a short distance before joining them at camp for lunch. When he didn't return, an extensive search was conducted, but only a single rifle cartridge was found in a stream. Despite Rivers' familiarity with the area, he was never seen again. Perhaps the most famous case is that of Paula Jean Weldon, an 18-year-old Bennington College sophomore who vanished on December 1st, 1946. Weldon set out for a hike on the long trail wearing a bright red coat. She was last seen by an elderly couple about 100 yards behind her on the trail. When she turned a corner, she seemingly vanished. Despite an extensive search involving the FBI and a $5,000 reward, no trace of Weldon was ever found. On December 1st, 1949, 3 years after Weldon's disappearance, James Tedford, a veteran and resident of the Bennington Soldiers' Home, allegedly vanished while riding a bus from St. Albans to Bennington. Witnesses reported seeing Tedford on the bus at the last stop before Bennington, but he was not on board when the bus arrived at its destination. His belongings remained in the luggage rack, and an open bus timetable was found on his seat. However, some researchers questioned the details of this case, noting a gap between when Tedford was last seen and when he was reported missing. On October 12, 1950, 8-year-old Paul Buddy Jepson disappeared near the family truck while his mother was tending to pigs. Bloodhounds tracked the boy's scent along a logging road to an intersection of back roads near a stream, but the trail ended there. Some accounts suggest this location was near where Paula Weldon had disappeared 4 years earlier. Despite extensive searches with high-powered flashlights, no trace of Paul was ever found. The final disappearance occurred on October 28, 1950, when 53-year-old Frida Langer vanished during a family camping trip near Somerset Reservoir. While hiking with her cousin Herbert Elsner, Langer slipped and fell into a stream. She told Elsner she would return to the campsite to change clothes and catch up with him. When she didn't return, a massive search involving aircraft, helicopters, and up to 300 searchers was conducted. No trace of Langer was found until May 12, 1951, when her body was discovered in an area that had been previously searched. Due to the condition of her remains, no cause of death could be determined. The Bennington Triangle disappearances have sparked numerous theories and speculations about their causes. Some theorists suggest that a serial killer may have been active in the area during this period. However, no concrete evidence supports this theory, and the diverse nature of the victims makes it less likely. Local legends and folklore have given rise to theories involving paranormal entities or supernatural forces. These include stories of a Bennington monster, described as a large, hairy, bipedal creature similar to Bigfoot. The rugged terrain and harsh weather conditions of the area could have contributed to some disappearances. The region's dense forests and challenging landscape might have led to people becoming lost or succumbing to the elements. Some have reported strange lights and unexplained aerial phenomena in the area, leading to speculation about possible alien abductions or interference. Drawing on local legends, some believe the area might be cursed, referencing stories such as the man-eating stone on Glastonbury Mountain. Some researchers suggest that a combination of dense forests, rugged terrain, and the area's remoteness could make it difficult for lost individuals to find help or be located by search parties. More speculative theories propose the existence of a time warp or interdimensional portal in the area, explaining the seemingly impossible disappearances. Beyond the disappearances, the triangle has been associated with various other unusual occurrences and sightings. Reports of a creature known as the Bennington monster date back to around 1800. One notable incident involved a stagecoach full of passengers being attacked by a giant hairy creature that knocked the vehicle on its side. The area has been the site of numerous UFO sightings and reports of strange lights in the sky. Visitors and residents have reported hearing unusual and unexplained sounds in the forests around Glastonbury Mountain. Some local lore suggests that wearing red in the area is bad luck, possibly connected to Paula Weldon's red coat at the time of her disappearance. In the aftermath of the devastating Las Vegas shooting on October 1st, 2017, investigators were left with numerous questions surrounding the perpetrator, Stephen Paddock. As authorities worked to uncover a motive and piece together the events leading up to the tragedy, an unexpected development emerged. Paddock's home in Reno was broken into. The incident was first noticed by an alert neighbor who observed a light on inside the seemingly vacant home. This observation prompted a call to local law enforcement, setting in motion a series of events that would further complicate the ongoing investigation. Reno police officers responded to the neighbor's call early on a Sunday morning. Upon arrival, they made a startling discovery. Someone had indeed broken into Paddock's house. The property, located near Interstate 80, had become a point of interest for investigators following the shooting. Officer Tim Broadway confirmed that the intruders had gained entry through the front door of the residence. However, the exact method of entry remained unclear, leaving investigators to question whether the break-in was a sophisticated operation or a more opportunistic crime. Upon discovering the break-in, local police immediately contacted the FBI. The break-in presented several challenges for investigators. The timing of the incident during an active and highly publicized investigation raised questions about the intruder's motives and potential connection to the case. Despite intense interest from law enforcement and the FBI, the home was still vulnerable to unauthorized entry, pointing to potential gaps in security measures. Any unauthorized entry risked contaminating the crime scene, potentially compromising valuable evidence. Initial reports indicated that no one had been seen entering or leaving the property, complicating efforts to identify the intruder or intruders. Prior to the break-in, law enforcement had already conducted searches of Paddock's properties, including the Reno home. These searches had yielded significant findings. During their initial search on October 3rd, 2017, authorities discovered a substantial cache of weapons and ammunition at the Reno property. Las Vegas Sheriff Joseph Lombardo reported that the home contained 5 handguns, 2 shotguns, several electronic devices, and a plethora of ammunition. In addition to the Reno home, investigators had searched another of Paddock's retirement community residences in Mesquite, Nevada. This search also resulted in the discovery of weapons, explosives, and electronic devices. The presence of similar items across multiple properties suggested a pattern of behavior and preparation that investigators were keen to dig deeper into. As part of the investigation, Paddock's brain was examined during the autopsy process. However, this examination revealed nothing unusual, further complicating efforts to understand his actions. Reports emerged that Paddock had been prescribed an anti-anxiety medication in June 2017 by a doctor in Henderson, Nevada. On April 29, 2003, the East Nashville neighborhood was shaken by the disappearance of 13-year-old Tabitha Tuders. This case has remained unsolved for over 2 decades, leaving her family, law enforcement, and the community searching for answers. The morning of April 29, 2003 began like any other for the Tuders family in East Nashville, Tennessee. Tabitha was preparing to head to school. Her father, Bo, woke her up before leaving for work as per his routine. Tabitha was expected to walk a short distance from her home on Lillian Street to her bus stop at the intersection of Boscobel Street and 14th Street. This was a familiar route she had taken many times before, and there was no indication that this day would be any different from the others. She left her house sometime between 7:30 and 8 a.m. intending to catch the school bus to Bailey Middle School, located about 2 miles away. However, she did not board the bus that day. Witnesses later reported seeing her walking toward the bus stop, but noted that she never actually got on the bus. As the day progressed and Tabitha did not return home from school at her usual time, her mother, Deborah, became increasingly worried. Her concern grew when she went to Tabitha's school and discovered from other students that they had not seen Tabitha that day. This realization prompted Deborah to contact the Metropolitan Nashville Police Department and file a missing person report. Upon receiving the report, the police department swiftly initiated their standard missing person protocols. Officers were dispatched to the Tuders' home to gather initial information and begin the preliminary investigation. During this first visit, police conducted a thorough search of the house, looking for any clues that might shed light on Tabitha's disappearance or her current whereabouts. One of the most significant findings during the house search was the discovery that Tabitha had left behind $20 and her house key. This detail would later become crucial in shaping the investigation's direction, as it suggested that Tabitha had not planned to be away from home for an extended period. Additionally, investigators collected Tabitha's hairbrush and toothbrush to obtain DNA samples, which could potentially be used for identification purposes if needed. As part of the initial investigation, police interviewed Tabitha's family members to gather more information about her routine and any recent changes in behavior. It was during this time that Tabitha's sister, Jamie, provided valuable information by examining the laundry she had folded the previous night. Jamie was able to deduce that Tabitha had likely left the house wearing a blue top, jeans, and white sneakers. This description of Tabitha's clothing would prove essential in the search efforts and subsequent witness interviews. Despite the evidence suggesting Tabitha had not run away, the police initially considered it. This consideration was standard procedure in missing person cases involving teenagers. However, Tabitha's family vehemently denied this possibility, insisting that it was completely out of character for her. The family's adamant stance, coupled with the evidence found in the house, would soon lead investigators to shift their focus away from the runaway theory. One of the most controversial aspects of the initial investigation was the decision not to issue an Amber Alert. The alert is typically reserved for cases where there is clear evidence of abduction and where the child is believed to be in imminent danger. In Tabitha's case, the lack of concrete evidence of abduction at the time led to the decision not to issue an alert. This decision would later be scrutinized and debated as the case gained more attention. As night fell on that first day, the search efforts intensified. The police, aided by concerned neighbors, conducted an extensive search of a 5-mile radius around the Tuders' house. This search involved both ground teams and aerial support, with officers meticulously combing through the East Nashville neighborhood. They searched abandoned buildings, wooded areas, and any locations where a child might potentially hide or be hidden. Notably, Deborah did not participate in the physical search efforts that first night. Instead, she chose to remain at home, holding on to the hope that Tabitha might return on her own. As the investigation progressed into the following days, law enforcement began to receive and follow up on various leads and witness accounts. One of the most significant breakthroughs came when multiple witnesses reported seeing Tabitha near her bus stop on the morning of her disappearance. 3 different individuals reported seeing her at the intersection of 14th and Boscobel streets, while 2 of her schoolmates claimed to have seen her crossing the same streets. These eyewitness accounts provided crucial information about Tabitha's movements on the morning she vanished. Witnesses noted that she had been holding something in her hand, which investigators presumed to be her report card as it had been given to her the previous day. This detail helped establish a timeline and gave searchers a more precise area to focus their efforts. Perhaps the most intriguing and concerning lead came from a witness who reported seeing Tabitha talking to someone in a red vehicle near her bus stop on 15th Street. According to this account, the vehicle was seen turning around before Tabitha allegedly entered the front seat willingly. This information dramatically shifted the course of the investigation, suggesting the possibility of abduction rather than a runaway scenario. However, the details surrounding this red vehicle sighting were not without complications. Descriptions of the vehicle varied significantly among witnesses, with some describing it as a Volkswagen Beetle, while others reported it as a Ford Mustang. The color of the vehicle was also disputed, with with reports ranging from red to green. These inconsistencies made it challenging for investigators to narrow down their search for a specific vehicle. To corroborate the sighting of Tabitha near the vehicle, investigators employed the use of tracker dogs. Using the scent from Tabitha's stuffed animals, the dogs were able to confirm the witness accounts, leading investigators to the midpoint between the two streets where Tabitha had been reportedly seen. This evidence lent credibility to the witness statements and helped establish a more precise location for Tabitha's last known whereabouts. As news of Tabitha's disappearance spread, the community rallied around the Tuders family. Volunteers joined in the search efforts, distributing flyers with Tabitha's picture and description throughout Nashville and surrounding areas. The family also began making and distributing buttons, bracelets, and t-shirts to keep Tabitha's case in the public eye. In the days and weeks that followed, tips began to flood in from various sources. Many of these tips claimed sightings of Tabitha in different Nashville neighborhoods. Each of these leads was thoroughly investigated, but unfortunately, none of the reported sightings could be confirmed. One particular lead that garnered attention came from a man who visited the tattoo shop of Deborah's niece. He claimed that Tabitha had actually gotten into a green car, not a red one as previously reported. While it was unclear why this information had taken so long to surface, police took the lead seriously. They disseminated this new information through social media channels, hoping to generate new leads. However, despite their efforts, they were unable to locate the green vehicle or confirm this account. As the investigation continued, police began to look into individuals who might have had contact with Tabitha. They investigated an 18-year-old acquaintance of the family whose initials matched those found on a note in Tabitha's possession. However, this lead was quickly ruled out as the young man was confirmed to have been in class at the time of Tabitha's disappearance. Another person of interest emerged when the investigators learned of a man living in Kentucky who had been in Nashville around the time Tabitha vanished. This individual had a history of inappropriate relationships with underage girls and had previously been charged with statutory rape. Police brought him in for questioning and thoroughly investigated his background and movements. However, his alibi for the day of Tabitha's disappearance checked out, and he was ultimately cleared of involvement. On June 13, 1977, at Camp Scott in Oklahoma, 3 Girl Scouts aged between 8 and 10 were murdered in cold blood. Lori Farmer, Michelle Goose, and Denise Milner were eager to get to the Girl Scout camp for 2 weeks of fun. One of the camp volunteers named Michelle Hoffman recalled the parking lot filled with excited girls on Sunday, June 12th. Hoffman vividly remembers Denise Milner arriving at the camp. Being one of the few African-American girls on the trip, she was a little nervous. Hoffman went over to introduce herself to Denise and her mother before getting on the bus to go to the campsite. The camp was about 410 acres, with the vast majority of it being dense woods. Hoffman walked Denise to her tent, which was Kiowa number 8. Each of the tents were named after Native American tribes, and several girls were assigned to each one. Inside this tent, Denise met her campmates Lori and Michelle. All 3 girls bonded quite quickly, and before you knew it, they were laughing with each other. The first day was relatively mundane as the organizers just wanted the attendees to get used to their new tent mates and adjust to the new environment which they will be staying in for the next 2 weeks. Hoffman grew attached to cabin number 8 and went to say goodnight to the girls once it got dark, but they were already asleep. Now, on this particular night, there was a really bad thunderstorm. One of the campers wrote the following in her diary: "It was the darkest dark I had ever known. I couldn't tell if my eyes were open or shut." The very next morning at 6 a.m., one of the counselors named Carla White got up to make the final preparations for the day's activities. After doing so, she decided to take a shower, which was located down a trail. She briskly walked towards it, but saw something strange. At the base of a tree, just 100 yards from some tents, were some sleeping bags. Carla got closer and realized that inside of these bags were the lifeless bodies of Lori, Michelle, and Denise. Lori and Michelle were completely tucked away inside of their sleeping bags, while Denise was laying over the top of them. Carla frantically twisted around and ran for help. The director and nurse returned and confirmed that the girls were deceased. The 2-week camp had been called off and police were there to investigate shortly after being contacted. Lori and Michelle had died by blunt force trauma while Denise was strangled. All 3 were also raped. Investigators determined that the actual attacks happened inside of the tent and the bodies were then moved to the tree. The situation was far too grave for the camp to continue, so the director ultimately sent all of the kids home. One of the girl's parents were in Dallas, so her grandmother had to come by to pick her up. Obviously, the girl didn't really understand what was going on and was disappointed that she couldn't stay at camp. She asked her grandmother what happened, and she said, "Oh honey, 3 girls were killed at your camp last night." When she returned home, she wrote in her diary, "I came home from camp, 3 girls got killed." Once she grew up, she shared that she didn't even know what the word killed even meant at the time. Police spent the entire day sweeping the woods for any sign of the culprit, and as the weeks passed, they interviewed dozens of different people. It wasn't until June 23rd, 1977, when police publicly named a suspect. He was a 33-year-old convicted burglar and named Gene Leroy Hart. Gene escaped prison 4 years prior and had been on the run ever since. There was a cave that wasn't too far from the campgrounds where police found items left behind. It is believed that Gene used this location at some point before or after the murders. 10 months after Gene became the prime suspect, authorities were able to capture him. He was living in an old shack at an isolated home in the Cookson Hills. This was approximately 50 miles from the camp. Now, it's during the trial where things get very interesting, you could say. One of the very first things that Gene said in court was, "I want you to know one thing. I didn't kill those Girl Scouts." And there was a surprisingly high amount of people who sided with him. The community even organized a hog fry dinner event where people could donate money to help pay for Gene's legal fees. There were also t-shirts made that said, "Stop the Mays County Railroad," which was alluding to the possibility that Gene was used as a scapegoat by the police. Being that Gene was also of Native American descent, the Cherokee Tribal Council decided to donate $12,500 to help out as well. One particular aspect brought to the trial was the cave. There were a pair of glasses, some tape, and photographs that were believed to be owned by Gene as he worked in the photo lab when he was in prison. There were also various types of DNA found on the 3 girls. However, DNA testing wasn't introduced yet, so they were more or less useless. The offense attempted to use a footprint that was found to link Gene to the murders, but this print did not match Gene's shoe size. Then on March 20th, 1979, Gene was declared not guilty. But here's the thing. While Gene was not found guilty for these murders, he still had to serve 300+ years in prison for his previous charges of rape and burglary. Just 2 years after Gene died, he suffered a heart attack while exercising in prison. The verdict is a hotly debated topic. After Gene was declared not guilty, police sort of just gave up on the case. They were 100% certain that Gene was the culprit and had put all of their resources into proving Gene was guilty, and they failed. To them, they watched a killer get away. But there is one more detail that I haven't mentioned yet. If you recall, there was a volunteer named Hoffman. About 2 months before the murders, Hoffman was at the camp for a special event. When she stepped inside of her tent, it was an absolute mess. Someone had broken into it. Hoffman left behind a box of donuts which had been completely emptied, and on the floor, she noticed a few notes. There were about 4 pages, and on the first couple of them, the word "kill" was scribbled over and over. Then on the remaining pages, it said, "We're on a mission to kill 3 girls." Hoffman reported this to the director, and apparently a group of girls came forward and admitted to writing the letters, but it seems like such an odd prank. And not to mention, it's a suspicious coincidence that a couple weeks later, 3 girls were indeed murdered. The DNA obtained at the campsite was later tested in 2008, but they were too degraded to be useful. But in 2022, with new advancements in DNA analysis, the sheriff's office urged the families to invest towards another test. The cost for such an analysis was over $30,000, which the family and sheriff's office did not have. Fortunately, the community came together and provided the money through a fundraiser. The test results said that there was a strong likelihood that Gene was involved. Typically, these kinds of tests are very accurate, and saying that there is a strong chance virtually means that it is a match. But since it isn't technically a 100% match, officials can't exactly go out and say, "Oh, it really was Gene." It does seem that the vast majority of investigators and the public are of the opinion that Gene was the true culprit. But let me know what you think in the comments. The Isdal women refers to an unidentified female found dead at the Isdalen Valley, aka the Ice Valley, in Bergen, Norway on November 29, 1970. Police believe that the woman died of suicide, however, there are various details that may suggest otherwise. It was November 29th, 1970 when a man took his two daughters on a hiking trip to the Ice Valley. Unfortunately, the location is also often referred to as the Death Valley by locals due to the vast amount of suicides and accidents in the area. The girls noticed a smell that they did not recognize, but it did seem like something was burning. The group ventured closer to the source until they discovered the charred body of a woman. Immediately, they headed back from where they came from and contacted police. The front of the woman's body was severely burned to the point where her face was unrecognizable. Nearby was an empty bottle of alcohol, 2 plastic water bottles, a passport holder, boots, some clothing, a purse, and a matchbox. Just a couple days later, by chance, police found 2 suitcases which actually belonged to the same woman. Although the contents weren't all that notable, there were no items inside that could lead to the identification of the woman. Medical officials determined that she had passed away from carbon monoxide poisoning, and inside of her lungs was soot, which suggested that she was still alive when her body was burning. Furthermore, her neck was bruised, and after testing her blood, it was found that she had consumed anywhere between 50 and 70 sleeping pills. Authorities later located the hotel that she was staying at before she died. Hotel employees said that they last saw the woman on November 23rd. Police later discovered a notepad which had some obscure dates belonging to the woman. They were able to quickly decipher the dates as moments where the woman visited other locations in Europe. She also used about 8 different fake passports and aliases during her travels. Another odd behavior was that the woman seemed to change rooms as soon as she checked into her various hotels. The employees described the woman as beautiful and was estimated to be about 5 foot 4 inches tall. The case leaves many questions unanswered. Due to her peculiar travel tendencies, many people believe that she was tied to some sort of secret crime ring. Some suggested that she may have even been a spy involved in the Cold War. There were some records that were declassified from the Norwegian Armed Forces that highlighted the parallels in the woman's movements to the trial locations of the Penguin missile. A fisherman in Stavanger even claimed that he saw the woman, and then a shoe salesman believed that he sold her some rubber boots. In 1991, a taxi driver contacted police saying that he was the one that drove the woman after she checked out of her last hotel. He claimed that shortly after picking her up, an unknown man got in as well to join the trip to the train station. This man was never identified. Then, about 5 days before her body was discovered, a hiker said he saw her with 2 other men on the hillside of Fløyen. The hiker noticed that the woman seemed a bit withdrawn and worried that she was some sort of hostage. So he reported the sighting to police, but they said to just forget about it as it was probably nothing. Investigators later developed a theory that the woman may have been an escort based on her travel patterns. She always seemed to go back to the same point eventually. This could very well have been her home. She made an effort to remain anonymous, and the sightings of her with different men were all points that could support this theory. There was some evidence at the site of the woman's body that made it seem as though someone else was there. So it seems that the 2 prevailing theories revolve around murder or assisted suicide. But due to details such as the bruises found around her neck, some people believe that it was the former.